Hello everybody. So I was asked a couple of days ago, why do people think the USA set up the war in Ukraine? What do they get out of it? China is USA's biggest threat, not Russia. Why would they care about trying to hurt Russia by forcing Russia to invade Ukraine? Doesn't that seem illogical? So my answer is not a simple one, because yes, well, I guess simply you could say that hurting Russia hurts China. You explain that, you'd have to understand that Russia and China are not allies. Now, they're the most friendly with each other they are with anyone, but they're not friendly with each other. And the reason they're not friendly is because USA has been deliberately plotting to keep them apart. They've been telling Russia that China's bad and telling China that Russia's bad. So this war set up by USA to try to make that much worse, to make it so that China would permanently ignore Russia, not just be sort of a little bit friendly but not really friendly, so they would never go into Russia. They want to make Russia to control the narrative and invade to some evil reason, such as wanting to expand their territory, wanting to crush democracy, something like that, and then they invented all these false claims of war crimes and all sorts of things. Ukraine are this holier-than-thou country, sweet and innocent. Russia are these demons. Why would you want to go near them, China? We like you, China. I mean, China's on track to being the world's most powerful country eventually anyway. Just that China has said they're not in a rush. They're happy for it to take 50 years, 90 years, 120 years. As long as they get there eventually, they don't mind. But if they are allied up with Russia, that could happen almost instantly. Russia are in a rush, because Russia saw how quickly their power faded from when they were, unknown to them, the most powerful country in the world outright in 1984 and 1985, to being like 1/10 of that power by 1991. They didn't realise that they were actually the world's number one power. And that was not a joke, they really were. So, to understand this whole situation, I think it's best to go back a little bit in American history. So we all know that USA started off as 13 colonies of Great Britain. And anyone who thought that they were the most powerful country in the world at that stage, well, you can't take them very seriously. Now, why they defeated Britain? Well, they didn't really defeat Britain. They kicked them out, which is not quite the same thing. Great Britain had a whole massive empire, and they'd just been defeated by Hawaii, by the island of Hawaii, not the group of islands, because they were all separate islands at that stage. And they'd just been defeated when Hawaii went and just murdered Captain James Cook. And then Britain was good, we're going to retaliate, but then they said, oh no, we've got the whole Polynesian Empire, we're much stronger than you. So Britain went, oh okay, probably not. And then America had their revolution. Again, we're not calling it a coup, because we like this one. And it was a coup, but we like this one, so we're calling it a revolution. And yeah, got rid of Britain, got rid of England. So yeah, definitely America wasn't the most powerful country in the world at that point. In fact, they were irrelevant in world affairs. So if you were looking at, what was it, 1779, 1793, that sort of range, yeah, Britain were the most powerful country in the world. Who was second? Not really anyone. Not even sure who was second. Maybe Spain? Maybe? France were pretty strong. Germany were, well, they weren't even really a country. They were a bunch of separate little countries. Russia were fairly strong. Morocco still pretty strong. Yeah. Where were USA in the rankings? I don't know, 50th? They weren't up there, is my point. They were nowhere near up there. In fact, fact, in a head-to-head, they couldn't have beaten England, nor Hawaii. Hawaii were much weaker. But you see, it wasn't so much that they beat England, so much as England didn't want to fight. It wasn't worth it for them to fight. If they'd really wanted to, they could have taken back the 13 colonies. But, you know, they just sort of thought, well, that's not a very big landmass, it's not really worth it. Because then, over time, Americans had different strategies and took more land. So it expanded from the 13 colonies to the 50 states. They had a war with Mexico. They annexed Texas in a pretty sneaky manoeuvre, purchased Louisiana, bought Alaska off Russia, and so forth. And then they ended up with the current borders. But even with the current borders, they were still not a major player in World War I. So World War I, of course, 1914 to 1919, USA weren't featured. If you look at the list of who was fighting, nobody mentions USA. They weren't up there. You had, you know, Russia was a big country. Of course, Russia had a revolution, again, not a coup because we liked it, in the middle of it, and they became Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, also known as the Soviet Union. In Russian it translates as CCCP. And that was in the middle of World War I. Germany was pretty powerful. In fact, you'd probably say Germany were the most powerful country in the world in World War I. In fact, that's why Britain orchestrated the war, because they wanted to stay number one for a bit longer. Yeah, sure, they manipulated Serbia and Bosnia and all that sort of nonsense. There was an Austria-Hungary were pretty powerful. Yeah, USA weren't good. And their role was pretty isolationist. They didn't want to get involved in wars. Part of the reason was because they weren't strong enough. They were weak in world terms. Now, I've seen, some reports say that USA were 10th by World War I, by the end of World War I, they were 10th. And that's not too bad. No, so it was the start of World War I they were 10th. They'd gone up to about 7th by the end of World War I, because by fighting a big world war like that, countries lost out a fair bit. And this just made USA even more isolationist, because they're like, well, if we stay out of wars, we can become world number one. So when World War II came about, they were of course tempted to ally with Germany against Japan. They didn't like Japan. Japan was on opposite sides. And they did like Germany. They didn't like Britain. So, of course, eventually Germany and Japan joined up with each other. USA liked Germany, but they didn't like Japan. So they were a bit conflicted. They didn't like Britain, but that was the opposition to Japan. So they kind of just stayed out of it. They stayed neutral. And of course that supported their isolationist policy. So they sold oil to both sides. Even though they didn't like Japan, they were still selling oil to them. USA were at that stage one of the world's leading oil suppliers. That was where they got their wealth from, or most of their wealth. And a lot of the land which had oil, of course, used to be part of Mexico and so forth. But so they were supplying oil, they were supplying food, they were supplying weapons, anything you name it, they gave to everybody else. They even gave some to Britain. They didn't like Britain. They gave some to Japan. They didn't like Japan. They definitely gave some to Germany. They loved Germany. And they didn't like Russia much either. So all these countries USA didn't really like, they're giving oil to, they're giving food to, they're giving weapons to. And then the problem was, see, Japan then allied up with Germany. So Japan at the start of the war were actually fighting against China. They weren't involved with anyone else. And Japan should be getting crushed by China, but for whatever reason, in fact, Japan were interested. And then after they defeated China, they went, well, we're going to ally up with and Germany and Japan didn't like each other. They managed to find a peace. Germany tried to ally up with India first, almost did, then India said, nah, you keep your Nazi symbol, we use the same symbol in Hinduism, but it means something very different. So India stayed out of it, and then eventually India took the side of Britain, which is a pretty big deal considering they had just become independent from Britain. And USA, of course, they said, well, look, we've decided that we've got to enter the war because they could tell that Germany were winning. And they also knew, intelligence reports, that Germany were about to attack Russia. And if they defeated Russia, and yes, Russia had sort of been on their side but sort of neutral, but if Germany defeated Russia, they knew that Germany would then attack USA next. And that became very problematic for USA because they didn't have really much of an army. And if Germany came in a blitzkrieg, as they were doing to other countries, they would fall in a single night. And that was not something they wanted. So what they did was they said, well, hey, Japan, we don't like you. We're not going to trade with you in this port. They didn't say, oh, none of our ports, just have this port. You go around, you're going to go to the next one. If you come near that port, we'll bomb you. And they go, okay. And it was this next port, this next port, this next port. And it was a rolling trade embargo. And then they said, well, don't worry, you can fuel up in Indonesia. Oh, but we've also got a base on the way in Hawaii. If you go near that, we'll bomb you. And there was no way for Japan to not go near that. So Japan said, well, we're going to have to bomb Pearl Harbor. It's where the big military base is. They're the ones that are going to bomb you. Bomb us, we'll bomb you first. So essentially, USA forced Japan to bomb Pearl Harbor. It was manipulation, quite well known. Nobody really disputes this. In fact, it's just a fact that USA manipulated that. It was what you call a false flag attack. And it's one of the most famous and most successful in history. It effectively won USA the war. And I say it won USA the war. USA weren't fighting until then. But it was aimed at defeating Germany. But of course, USA liked, for the start of the war, not enough to join the war. They really didn't like Japan and so forth. So that then happened, and of course we know that by the end of the war then USA pumped up their military production, and because they pushed this lie that Pearl Harbor was so evil, people were so angry at the Japanese that they went to war against them. And this fervour led to USA becoming so powerful that they were actually a factor in the war. And they were probably still fourth behind Germany, Japan, Great Britain and Russia. Or probably just ahead of Russia. And Russia was probably fifth. Now Russia were hurt terribly in the war. They lost like 20 million lives. And so you'd think that at the end of the war, okay, USA didn't lose that much, so they can be number one, but Russia shouldn't be number two. But yet, somehow they were. And when the five allied nations, so that was, and I mean, realistically, it was really just Great Britain and USA. France lost pretty much instantly, China lost pretty much instantly, and Russia, or USSR, all that they really did was to not get completely annihilated by Germany, who they were allied with to start with. So realistically, in a real sense, it was two countries, but they had the other three added to the list anyway, even though they didn't really do anything. And so Great Britain was the major party, but USA came in at the end. So this made USA undisputably the world's number one country. But USSR under Joseph Stalin became so powerful so quickly that they were joint with them. And then they just hid everything from everyone else. And then they added the Warsaw Pact. And in response, USA had to create NATO to respond to the Warsaw Pact. Now early on, as we now know, USSR were not as powerful as USA. So when this first happened in 1949, the start of the Cold War, USA were more powerful. But they didn't really know. But by about 1960, USSR was so close to the power of USA that they were pretty much equal. And then we had the Cuban Missile Crisis, and then USSR kept getting stronger, and at different points they were more powerful. And certainly around 1983, 84, 85, as we now know, USSR was so much more powerful than USA, and neither side knew this, but they were so much more powerful that USSR could have sent troops marching through Europe, conquered the whole of Europe, and then taken over the world. Now, had they done that, they would have, well, the Soviet Union wouldn't have collapsed, and they would have won the Cold War. But, of course, because they didn't know that, they thought USA were about to attack. They weren't, and they couldn't sustain having such a high proportion of their money going to military, and because they weren't using it to conquer other lands, they collapsed. And in 1991, the Soviet Union fell apart. So a lot of Americans are aware of that. They're aware of that history, and they're aware that USA has only been the world's #1 country, or at least undisputed, since 1991. And now China has started to go up the ranks. Now, throughout most of this time, China were not number 3. So it was USA, USSR, number 1 and 2. Number 3 was Britain. And number 4 and 5 were probably Japan and Germany. So China wasn't in contention, but China slowly grew up the ranks. And by the time that the Soviet Union fell apart, China were up to number 3. Well, they were number 4, then the Soviet Union fell behind them, and they moved up to number 3. And then not long after that, they moved up to number 2. And China became a threat by themselves. Now, then what happened was that then, of course, Russia, who had only half the population of USSR, started to realise when they looked through the notes and go, oh, actually, we were more powerful than we thought we were. Because USA, of course, pushed this lie and said, oh, USSR were never powerful. The whole way through it was all just a lie. Well, that wasn't true. They were powerful, just not all the time and not at the end. So there was this, and then Russia realised that and went, oh, we should do this again. So they did it again, built up the power, and then instead of just having way too much money spent on military and doing nothing with it, they started invading other countries and tried to expand their empire. And USA didn't like this. And they're going, well, no, you've got to be our puppet now, Russia. We need you as our puppet against China. And Russia's like, get stuffed. And then Russia's starting to ally with China. So USA said, no, you hate China, remember? Even though they were both on the Eastern Bloc, sort of, and I mean, China wasn't part of the Warsaw Pact. They weren't part of USSR. But when you had East Berlin and East Germany, that was Russia and China, or USSR and China. So there's this uneasy bit. And USA try to pervert that. Because, let's talk in simple terms. China has the biggest economy in the world. And, well, it's now down to the second biggest population, but they were first until like last year, and they're pretty much equal first with India. So they have a huge population, huge amount of money, and they're the second strongest military. They're lacking nukes, but more important than lacking nukes, well, that's pretty important too, they're also lacking lots of land. Now, what's a country that they border with that has lots of land, doesn't have enough people, and also have lots of nukes? And they're kind of allied with. If China and Russia became one country, they would have 1.7 billion people, I think, around about, and they'd have triple the land mass of anywhere else. They wouldn't be struggling with no room to go, and they would not only would have the most nukes in the world, but they'd be able to produce so many so quickly with all that extra population, they could become just ridiculously strong really quickly. Now, China could just invade Russia and defeat them, but if they did that, Russia would nuke them, and that would wipe out China. Now, that's what USA wants. So, but if they sort of have an alliance, or a merging in friendly terms, their combined power would be about 5 times as strong as USA. It wouldn't be close. Now, that wouldn't be the instant that they merge. The instant that they merge, they'll probably be about on par with USA, maybe slightly stronger. But even now, they're both strong enough to stop USA from invading. And the worst thing that USA could do is invade them. So, what this war's really all about is about trying to stop Russia from properly allying up with China. And they failed in this. They failed with the sanctions, because instead of isolating Russia, it just pushed Russia towards China. And instead of China saying we don't want to ally with you, China says, well, we'll ally with you stronger than ever, but you have to do what we tell you to do. And all that's created is an unequal alliance in which China have a position where they could feasibly demand Russia to take some of their people, demand Russia to give them some of their land in return for continued economic security. And that's what's probably going to happen. And the longer that this war goes on, the worse it is for USA. It was a pretty stupid idea to start with, but it had some chance of success. But after 6 months, there was no longer any chance for USA to get any benefit out of it. And they had to withdraw, but they couldn't because Joe Biden had invested so much and told so many great lies, he couldn't withdraw. That's why you need a change of government. Donald Trump should be able to stop it. And in fact, not only could he have, anyone in his position could. So it's not something unique to Trump. It's just a new leader, whatever that new leader is called, would be able to stop it. I don't think that Trump is such an amazing person that he can do it and that no one else could. This would be easy to stop. In fact, anyone else besides Biden would have had a better solution to start with. Now, how to stop it? There's two ways that are viable for USA. There's one is the evil way, which is actually the most sensible way, and that is to invade Ukraine. And the other one is the one that makes everybody happy and makes USA look great, and that is to have binding referendums, not just for the 5 disputed territories in Ukraine, but for half of Ukraine. And also some other concessions. You have to give Russia pretty much whatever they want, which is half of Ukraine. And you have to make yourself look good out of doing it. Frozen conflict would be useless. Just simply giving Russia all that land would make USA look terrible. An invasion would make the USA look absolutely awful. But it would look so awful that Russia and China would ally with them, they'd have a world war, USA would win with Russia and China, then they'd divide up the world between the three of them. Don't know how much fighting would be involved, but there'd be at least a little bit. And then USA could get Russia and China to attack each other. And it'd be 2 against 1, and whichever side won, USA could then attack them, and then USA is the most powerful country in the world for the next 250 years or so. And that's the path to victory. But the path to looking good right now is the voting one. Anything less than that not only won't work, but it will be weak. And I'm hoping that Trump doesn't do one of the other things, like a frozen conflict would be awful for USA, be awful for the world. Anything which has Ukraine in any way winning would be awful for the world and awful for USA. And of course doing nothing would be just so disgusting. And there's no guarantee that Trump will do what he said he would. He might not end the war, he might just keep giving Ukraine money. So anyway, but that's your whole history of the whole thing. That's why this is so important to USA. And it's not a nonsensical thing, this is very important for them. But I think in retrospect they shouldn't have gone ahead with it, they should have stayed neutral. They should have allowed Russia to take Ukraine and just accepted Ukrainian refugees and said, bad Russia. And told the world how evil they were, but without doing anything about it. That's what they should have done. They didn't. This has been a big mistake. It was a risky manoeuvre by Joe Biden, I think mainly to cover up for his mistakes in Afghanistan, which essentially gave all the American equipment to Afghanistan to Taliban. And I think it ended up in Iran's hands or something. Anyway, and very bad move. You could see the merits to it, but it was a bad idea to start with. It didn't work, and they got to get out of there. They got to stop this war. And I think every country in the world knows this. At least the people that are in the know. It should be every political leader, every president, every prime minister, all of that. Anyway, that's it from me. Bye bye now.